This homeless girl was humiliated by a billionaire businessman when she simply asked for some change. But when he suffers a heart attack, she enters his hospital room and reveals something that leaves all the doctors in shock. Leave in the comments what you think will happen and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will touch your heart. The sun hadn't yet risen when Richard Sterling finished adjusting his Italian silk tie in front of the mirror. His long, steady fingers smoothed the fabric one last time, ensuring every millimeter was in place. The reflection showed a man of 52, perfectly coiffed grey hair, and a custom-made suit that cost more than many people earned in a year. His eyes, however, held a coldness that no amount of money could mask. The luxurious penthouse in the heart of Manhattan was silent, as it had been for the past 20 years. The white walls and modern furniture, chosen by a renowned interior designer, seemed more like a showroom than a home. There were no family photos, birthday cards, or any other sign of personal life. Just awards, certificates, and recognitions that attested to his success in the real estate market. His breakfast was always the same: a cup of black coffee, no sugar, and a piece of whole wheat toast, no butter. He ate standing up, watching the city wake up through the windows of the 30th floor. Down below, New York City was already pulsing, millions of lives moving like ants in a giant anthill. Richard observed them with a mixture of disdain and superiority. "Sir, the car is ready," announced Emily, his assistant, through the intercom. She was the only person who had direct access to his apartment, not out of trust, but out of necessity. At 38, Emily endured his difficult temperament and absurd demands because she needed to support her family. Richard knew this and used that information to his advantage. The meeting that day was crucial. After months of negotiation, he would finally close the purchase of a strategic plot of land in downtown. The project he planned to build there would double his already considerable fortune. Not that he needed more money, but the power and influence that would come with the undertaking were irresistible. The private elevator took him directly to the garage, where his driver was already waiting next to the armored Mercedes. Traffic was heavy as always, but Richard barely noticed. His thoughts were focused on the numbers, the strategies, the ways to maximize his profits. That's when the car stopped abruptly. "What's going on?" he asked, irritation evident in his voice. "Accident ahead, sir." "The road is completely blocked," replied the driver, trying to remain calm. Richard checked his watch. He couldn't afford to wait. The meeting would start in 20 minutes, and he had never, in his entire professional life, been late. "I'll walk," he declared, already opening the door before anyone could protest. The morning air hit him like a slap. It was colder than he expected, but it didn't matter. His office was only 4 blocks away. He began to walk at a brisk pace, dodging people who were moving too slowly for his taste. That's when he felt a tug on his jacket. He turned sharply, ready to reprimand whoever was so bold, but his words died in his throat. A little girl, no more than 5 years old, was staring at him with big, intelligent eyes. Her clothes were dirty and worn, but there was something in her gaze that disconcerted him. "Mister, can you help me? My grandma's sick," she said, articulating each word with surprising clarity for her age. Richard looked past her and saw an elderly woman sitting on the sidewalk, looking disoriented. Something about that scene deeply irritated him. It wasn't the poverty itself. He was already used to seeing people on the streets. It was the girl's gaze, too penetrating, too aware. "You should be in school," he said, his voice as cutting as ice. "Not here, trying to shake down people who work honestly." The girl didn't back down. "But mister, I just—" "Enough!" His voice rose, attracting the attention of the pedestrians around. "Your place isn't here. You are what's wrong with this city, a child being used to beg. Shame on you." He didn't notice the cell phones that began to be pointed in his direction, didn't notice the looks of disapproval. All he saw was that girl, with her eyes that seemed to see through him, challenging everything he represented. Go to school, learn to work, stop being a burden on society, he continued, his voice now trembling slightly with anger. The elderly woman tried to get up, stumbling. "Lily, come here, honey," she called, her voice weak and confused. Lily, the girl's name was Lily. For some reason, that detail bothered him even more. He turned his back and continued on his way, adjusting the jacket that the girl had touched as if he wanted to erase any trace of the encounter. He didn't see when Lily ran to help her grandmother, didn't see the silent tears that ran down the girl's face. What he didn't know, as he walked toward his office, was that that moment had been captured by dozens of cameras. In a matter of hours, his outburst would go viral on social media. His life, so carefully controlled, was about to fall apart. But at that moment, all that mattered was the meeting. He arrived at the office exactly 2 minutes before the scheduled time, enough time to recompose his mask of professional coldness. He sat at the head of the meeting table, ignoring the slight tightness in his chest that was beginning to bother him. It was just another day in the life of Richard Sterling, a man who had built an empire on foundations of indifference and cruelty. He didn't know it, but the universe was about to teach him a lesson that no amount of money could buy. The meeting was proceeding exactly as Richard had planned. His arguments were precise, his projections impeccable. The investors present nodded in approval as he presented the numbers for the new development. The land would be his in a matter of hours. However, something was different. The tightness in his chest that had started as a slight discomfort now intensified with each minute. Emily, sitting in the corner of the room taking notes, realized that something was wrong. She knew every nuance of her boss's behavior after years of working alongside him. She noticed when he discreetly loosened his tie how his forehead began to sweat, the way his breathing became increasingly heavy. And as you can see in the next slide, Richard stopped in mid-sentence, leaning on the table. The room began to spin. Worried voices sounded distant, as if he were underwater. The last thing he saw before collapsing was Emily's face, near first time demonstrating something beyond the usual fear. It was genuine concern. While the ambulance raced through the streets of Manhattan carrying an unconscious Richard across town, Lily and her grandmother Evelyn faced their own challenges. The encounter with the businessman had shaken the girl more than she cared to admit. It wasn't the harsh words that hurt her. She was used to the cruelty of the streets. It was something deeper, a strange feeling she couldn't explain. "Grandma, you need to take your medicine," said Lily, trying to get Evelyn to swallow a pill broken in half. It was the last one from the pack they had gotten at a donation drive 3 months ago. Evelyn looked at her granddaughter without really seeing her. Her eyes, once so lively and loving, now wandered lost around the street. Alzheimer's was progressing rapidly, stealing more and more pieces of her mind. In her lucid moments, she cried when she realized that she would soon no longer recognize her only granddaughter's face. "Who are you, child?" asked Evelyn, her gaze confused. "It's me, Grandma, Lily, your granddaughter," replied the little girl, swallowing the lump in her throat. It was the 3rd time that day she had to introduce herself. "Lily? What a pretty name," murmured Evelyn, a brief flash of recognition passing through her eyes before fading again. "You look like someone I used to know. A doctor." The girl held her grandmother's hand, feeling her cold skin. She wasn't well. Evelyn had barely eaten in the last few days, refusing the little food they could get. Lily knew, with an understanding beyond her age, that they needed urgent help. That's when she noticed that Evelyn started to shake. It wasn't from the cold. Something was wrong, very wrong. Her grandmother slumped to the side, her eyes rolling back. "Help!" cried Lily, her small body trying to support her grandmother. "Please, someone help me!" People hurried past, some looking sideways, others pretending not to see. A lady finally stopped, her cell phone already dialing 911. In minutes, another ambulance raced through the streets of Manhattan, this time carrying Evelyn and Lily. At the hospital, Richard woke up in a private room, surrounded by the best that money could buy. Monitors beeped constantly, recording every beat of his irregular heart. Emily was there, organizing papers and answering calls, trying to minimize the damage from his sudden absence. "Preliminary tests indicate a serious cardiac condition," explained Dr. Harrison, a man of 45 with tired eyes who had seen a lot of suffering. "We'll need to do more tests, but you'll have to stay in the hospital for now." Richard tried to protest, but his voice came out weak. He picked up his cell phone, determined to at least keep up with his business, when he noticed the dozens of notifications. His face paled as he saw the video circulating on social media, him yelling at a homeless child. The comments were ruthless. Richard Sterling Monster was already one of the top trending topics on Twitter. "This can't be happening," he murmured, feeling his heart race dangerously. In the public wing of the same hospital, Lily watched the doctors examine her grandmother. There was something familiar about that environment, in the medical terms that floated around her. Words she shouldn't understand made sense in her mind. "Blood pressure 180 over 100, said a nurse. "Initiating stroke protocol," replied a doctor. Lily knew what that meant, although she didn't know how she knew. It was as if the information was simply there, somewhere in her mind, waiting to be accessed. Dr. Harrison, who was passing through the hallway on his way to Richard's room, stopped when he heard the girl mutter something about thrombolytics and therapeutic window. He approached, intrigued. "Do you know what those words mean, little one?" he asked, crouching down to be at her height. Lily hesitated. The last time she tried to talk to a well-dressed adult, it hadn't ended well. But there was something different in the doctor's gaze, a kindness that made her trust him. "I know my grandma needs a specific medicine in the next 3 hours, she replied, her voice small but confident, "and that the left side of her body is weaker than the right." Dr. Harrison's eyes widened. The girl had just made an accurate diagnosis of acute ischemic stroke, something that some residents took months to learn to identify correctly. Meanwhile, in the private room, Richard received more devastating news. His condition was more serious than they initially imagined. He would need a transplant urgently, but his chances were minimal due to the complexity of the case. "Do you have any family members we can contact?" asked the nurse. Richard closed his eyes. Family, a word that had long lost meaning in his life. His parents had passed away years ago without ever having approved of his choices. He had no siblings, was divorced, never had children. He had built an empire, but he was completely alone. The universe, in its ironic wisdom, had placed in the same hospital two souls who couldn't be more different. A man who had everything, except what really mattered, and a girl who had nothing, except an extraordinary gift that was about to change. Both lives forever. That night, as Manhattan continued its frantic pace outside, inside the hospital, two stories began to intertwine in ways that no one could have predicted, and that was just the beginning. Richard spent most of his time staring at the white ceiling of the hospital, his mind alternating between anger and despair. The shares of his companies plummeted every hour, while the video of his outburst continued to spread like wildfire. Emily tried to control the damage, but it was like trying to hold back a tsunami with her bare hands. "The main investors are threatening to withdraw support for the new development," she informed him, her voice tense. "The press won't stop calling. They want an official statement about the video." Richard didn't respond. The heart monitor next to the bed recorded his irregular heartbeat, a constant reminder of his newfound fragility. Doctors came and went, ran tests, consulted charts, but no one seemed able to fully understand his case. At the other end of the hospital, Dr. Harrison was fascinated with Lily. The girl demonstrated a medical knowledge that defied any logical explanation. After conducting some preliminary tests, he discovered that she possessed a very rare neurological condition, a kind of medical synesthesia that allowed her to see symptoms and conditions just by observing patients. "It's like I feel what they feel," explained Lily, distractedly playing with the worn hem of her t-shirt. "The colors change when something is wrong in people's bodies." The doctor made notes, frantic notes, marveling. In his 20 years of practice, he had never encountered anything like it. "And have you always had this ability?" Lily frowned, trying to remember. "I think so. My mom—" She stopped, a shadow passing over her face. The memories of her mother were confused, like a puzzle with missing pieces. Meanwhile, Evelyn was being treated in a special ward. The stroke had been controlled in time, thanks to Lily's early diagnosis, but her Alzheimer's complicated the recovery. In her lucid moments, she called for her granddaughter, but most of the time she wandered through old memories, confusing nurses with people from her past. "She needs to stay here for observation," a social worker explained to Lily. "And you, honey? Do you have any other family members we can contact?" The girl shook her head. It was just her and her grandmother. It always had been. The social worker made some more notes on her clipboard, worried about the child's future. It was that same afternoon that Lily, tired of standing still, began to wander through the hospital corridors. Her bare feet made no noise on the cold floor, and no one seemed to notice her presence. It was a skill she had developed on the streets, becoming invisible when necessary. She passed several rooms, observing the patients through the half-open doors. The colors danced in her vision: red for inflammation, blue for respiratory problems, green for infections. It was like a code that only she could decipher. When she arrived at Richard's room, something different caught her attention. The color around him was strange, a pattern she had never seen before. She entered silently, observing the man who, hours before, had humiliated her on the street. Richard was sleeping, his face marked by an expression of pain. Lily approached the bed, analyzing the monitors with an understanding she shouldn't have. There was something wrong with the treatment. She could feel it. The doctors were focusing on the wrong place. "What are you doing here?" Richard's voice, hoarse and hostile, surprised her. Lily took a step back, but didn't run away. "Your heart, the color is wrong." Richard recognized her instantly, the girl from the street, the cause of his disgrace. He wanted to yell at her again, kick her out of there, but he didn't have the strength. Besides, there was something different in her gaze, a certainty, a wisdom that intrigued him against his will. "What are you talking about?" he asked, trying to keep his tone harsh, but his curiosity betrayed him. "It's not your heart that's sick." "Well, it is, but it's not the main cause," she explained, pointing to his chest. "It's like there's a knot here. The medicines they're giving you won't fix it." Richard was about to call the nurse when Lily continued, "You feel like you're suffocating, don't you? Even when you take a deep breath. And there's a pain that comes and goes in your left arm. But it's not constant like it should be. If it was just the heart." He froze. That's exactly how he felt, but he hadn't been able to explain it to the doctors. How could that child know? At that moment, Dr. Harrison entered the room, looking for Lily. He stopped when he saw the scene, the girl next to the bed of one of the most important patients in the hospital, the same man who had humiliated her hours before. "Lily, you shouldn't be here," he began, but the girl interrupted him. "Doctor, they're treating him wrong. It's not just his heart. There's something pressing here." She pointed to a specific region of Richard's chest. "That's why the medicines aren't working." Dr. Harrison hesitated. He had learned in the last few hours not to underestimate the girl's observations. Explain better. As Lily detailed what she saw, using simple words to describe complex medical conditions, the doctor's face changed. He picked up Richard's chart, analyzed the tests again, and began to make quick notes. This makes sense, he murmured more to himself. We need to redo some tests, specific to that region. Richard watched the scene with a mixture of disbelief and reluctant hope. The same child he had treated with such contempt was possibly saving his life. The irony of the situation did not escape him. "How do you know these things?" he asked, his voice now softer. Lily shrugged. "I just see. I've always seen. My mom used to say—" She stopped again, that same shadow crossing her face. Dr. Harrison sensed the moment of tension and interfered. "Let's do these new tests right now. Lily, you should go back near your grandmother." The girl nodded and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned one last time to Richard. "Don't be afraid. Now they'll know how to help." After she left, the room seemed to get colder, more sterile. Richard stared at the door, his mind a confusion of thoughts. How had he allowed himself to judge that child so harshly? What else had he lost in his life because of his prejudices? What no one knew, while the new tests were being prepared in a hurry, was that meeting had triggered a series of events that would forever change not only the lives of Richard and Lily, but also reveal secrets long buried in the past. The new tests confirmed what Lily had said. A rare condition was causing pressure on Richard's heart, something that the doctors had missed in the initial diagnoses. The treatment would be much simpler than a transplant, a relatively routine surgery. Who could solve the problem? Dr. Harrison was in his office, analyzing the results with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. How had a 5-year-old child managed to diagnose something that an entire team of specialists didn't see? His gaze alternated between the tests and a scientific article on his computer about rare cases of children with extraordinary medical abilities. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Emily, Richard's assistant. "Doctor, I need your help," she said, closing the door behind her. "I did some research on the girl, Lily, and I found something you need to see." She placed a folder with old newspaper clippings on the table. The main headline, from 3 years ago, immediately caught the doctor's attention. "Brilliant researcher dies in mysterious circumstances." The photo showed a young woman with the same piercing eyes as Lily. It was Dr. Marina Santos, a promising researcher who was developing groundbreaking studies on early diagnosis of rare diseases. According to the report, she had died in a supposed car accident, but several questions about the case remained unanswered. "Her mother," murmured Dr. Harrison, the pieces starting to fall into place in his mind. "Yes," confirmed Emily. "And there's more. In the weeks before her death, Marina had sent several emails to the Medical Ethics Committee. She was reporting irregularities in some research, but never got to present the evidence she claimed to have." Meanwhile, in Richard's room, something unexpected was happening. For the first time in his life, he found himself thinking about someone other than himself. The image of Lily wouldn't leave his head, no longer as the street girl he had humiliated, but as the extraordinary being she was. "How is she?" he asked a nurse who was adjusting his IV drip. "Who?" "Lily and her grandmother." The nurse hesitated. "The elderly woman is stable, but the Alzheimer's is very advanced. As for the girl—" She lowered her voice. "Social services is trying to decide what to do. They can't let her go back to the streets, but they also have nowhere to take her while her grandmother is hospitalized." Something tightened in Richard's chest, and it wasn't his cardiac condition. It was a different feeling, something he hadn't felt in so long that he had almost forgotten what it was. Guilt. In the public wing of the hospital, Lily was sitting next to Evelyn's bed, holding her wrinkled hand. Her grandmother was having one of her lucid moments, and thick tears rolled down her face, marked by time. "My little granddaughter," whispered Evelyn, her voice trembling, "you are just like your mother. She also saw things that no one else saw." Lily squeezed her grandmother's hand. "Grandma, tell me more about Mom. Why did she leave?" Evelyn closed her eyes, as if the memory were too painful. "Your mother was special, like you. She discovered something bad people." Her voice began to fail, lucidity slipping away again. "I need to protect you. They can't know." "Who, Grandma? Who are they?" But Evelyn was already lost again in her confused world, murmuring disconnected words about doctors and research. Outside the room, a man watched the scene through the ajar door. Dr. Clayton Abernathy, 49, was considered an eminence in the hospital. His aristocratic face and polished manners hid a calculating nature that few knew. He had been alerted about the extraordinary case of the girl by other doctors, but something in particular had caught his attention: her last name. Santos. The same last name as Marina, the researcher who had almost destroyed his career 3 years ago. Clayton approached, his impeccable white coat rustling slightly as he walked. "Hello, little one," he said, using his gentlest tone. "I'm Dr. Abernathy. I've heard a lot about you." Lily looked up, and for a moment something flashed in her memory: a similar face, younger, arguing with her mother in a laboratory. But the memory escaped before she could grasp it. "The other doctors told me about your special gift." He continued, "I would very much like to study your case. We could help many people with your abilities." There was something in his smile that made Lily shrink instinctively. The colors she saw around him were different from any other she had ever observed, a dark, threatening tone. "I don't need studies," she replied, her voice small but firm. "I just want to stay with my grandma." Clayton's smile faltered for a second. "But your grandmother needs special care, doesn't she? I could help. I have a private clinic, exclusive. She would have the best treatment." At that moment, Evelyn began to stir in bed, her widened eyes fixed on Clayton. "No, not him. Marina, be careful." The disconnected words of the elderly woman made Clayton's blood run cold. Even in her weakened mental state, some part of Evelyn recognized him. This was dangerous. "I think your grandmother is agitated," he said, his voice now colder. "I'll ask the nurse to give her a sedative." When Clayton left the room, his amiable face had been replaced by a somber expression. He needed to act fast. The girl was a risk he couldn't allow. If she had inherited more than just her mother's gift, if she also had her memories. At the end of the hallway, Dr. Harrison finished, reading the files that Emily had brought. His face was pale. Among the papers there were mentions of a prominent doctor who was falsifying research results. The name was not cited, but the dates coincided with the period in which Clayton Abernathy had published his most famous studies. Night fell over Manhattan, enveloping the hospital in shadows. In his private room, Richard was making a decision that would change his life forever. On another floor, Clayton Abernathy was making discreet calls, moving pieces of a deadly game. And between them, a little girl with an extraordinary gift held her grandmother's hand, unaware that she was the center of a storm about to explode. Richard's surgery was scheduled for the next morning. He watched the illuminated city through the window of his room, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The cell phone on the table next to him continued to vibrate with messages and notifications, his life collapsing in real time on social media. But for the first time, that didn't seem so important. Emily entered the room carrying more papers. Her deep eye bags betrayed sleepless nights, trying to control the damage to her boss's reputation. However, there was something different in her expression an urgency that went beyond the usual worries. "Sir, we need to talk," she said, closing the door carefully. "It's about Lily." Richard sat up in bed, suddenly attentive. Emily continued, "I made some disturbing discoveries. Her mother, Marina Santos, didn't die in a simple accident. She was about to report serious irregularities in medical research. And guess who was behind that research?" "Clayton Abernathy," answered a voice from the door. It was Dr. Harrison, who had entered silently. "And now he's showing a suspicious interest in Lily." The atmosphere in the room became tense. Harrison shared his findings, the fraudulent articles, the complaints that Marina tried to make, the mysterious circumstances of her death. Clayton had built his reputation on manipulated research, and Marina was about to expose everything. "But what does this have to do with Lily?" asked Richard, a genuine concern in his voice. "Her gift," explained Harrison. "It's unique. Clayton wants to study her, but I'm sure his intentions go beyond scientific research. If Lily inherited not only her mother's abilities, but also some of her memories, she could be a witness," completed Emily, "even without knowing it." On the other side of the hospital, Lily was huddled in an uncomfortable chair next to Evelyn's bed. Her grandmother was sleeping a restless sleep, murmuring disconnected words. The little one struggled against sleep, determined to protect the only family member she had left. Her eyelids were almost closing when she heard footsteps in the hallway. They were different from the nurse's footsteps, heavier, more determined. She hid behind the chair. An instinct developed on the streets. Clayton entered the room like a shadow. He quickly checked the hallway before approaching Evelyn's bed. He took a syringe from his coat pocket and began to inject something into the elderly woman's IV drip. "It's just a stronger sedative," he said, noticing Lily behind the chair. "Your grandmother needs to rest." But Lily could see the colors. A dark red, almost black, emanating from the liquid. It wasn't a common sedative. It was something much more dangerous. "Stop!" she cried, running to pull out the syringe. "You're hurting her." Clayton grabbed the girl's arm tightly. "You're exactly like your mother, always meddling where you shouldn't." His face was different now. The mask of kindness had fallen, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. "You know, I really hope to do this the easy way. Get your legal guardianship, take you to my clinic along with your grandmother, but you're making things difficult, like Marina did." Lily struggled, trying to break free. Memories began to flash. In her mind, her mother screaming in a laboratory, papers scattered, the same cruel face of Clayton. You hurt my mother. Your mother was a fool who didn't know how to keep quiet," he growled, squeezing the girl's arm harder. "And now you will let her go immediately," a voice thundered from the door. Richard was there, leaning on a cane, still wearing the hospital gown. Behind him, Emily filmed everything with her cell phone, while Dr. Harrison was already running to check Evelyn's IV drip. Clayton released Lily, trying to recompose his professional facade. "This isn't what it looks like." The girl was agitated. "I just trying to silence her like you did with her mother," interrupted Harrison, who had removed the contaminated IV. "This isn't a common sedative, Clayton. It's something much more lethal." Clayton's face contorted into a mask of fury. He advanced toward the door, but Richard, even in his weakened state, didn't move. "You're not going anywhere," said Richard, his voice charged with an authority that made Clayton hesitate. "The police are already on their way, and this time you won't escape." Lily ran to Richard, hugging his legs. He placed a protective hand over her shoulders, surprised by his own instinct to protect her. Evelyn chose this moment to wake up, her eyes strangely lucid. "Marina," she tried to warn, "the files in the necklace." Everyone turned to the elderly woman. Lily took her hand to her neck, touching a thin cord she always carried with. Winter, a gift from her mother that she had never managed to open. Clayton took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the necklace, but hospital security guards were already entering the room, alerted by Emily. In a matter of minutes, he was being taken into custody, his protests of innocence echoing through the corridors. Dr. Harrison examined Evelyn quickly. "We managed to stop the medication in time. She'll be fine." Richard leaned heavily against the wall, his heart protesting with the effort. Emily rushed to help him, but he kept his eyes fixed on Lily, who was now examining the necklace with renewed curiosity. "How did you know?" she asked, looking at Richard. "How did you know I was in danger?" Richard tried to smile, but it was more a grimace of pain. "Let's just say I learned to see things in a different way, thanks to you." At that moment, something changed irrevocably between them. The man who had built his life despising others found himself deeply concerned about the well-being of a little street girl, and Lily, who had learned to distrust everyone, especially the rich and powerful, felt inexplicably safe by his side. What neither of them knew was that Lily's necklace held even deeper secrets, secrets that her mother had hidden there, waiting for the right moment to come to light. The night was just beginning, and more revelations awaited in the shadows of the hospital. The early morning dragged on in the hospital as a small crowd gathered in Evelyn's room. Dr. Harrison examined Lily's necklace carefully, looking for some opening mechanism. Richard, who had refused to return to his room despite the nurse's protests, watched everything from an improvised armchair with Emily by his side. "Did your mother ever say anything about this necklace?" Harrison asked gently to Lily. The girl shook her head, her small fingers stroking the pendant. "Only that it was very important and that one day I would understand. She put it on my neck the last time I saw her." Evelyn, more lucid after the traumatic event, murmured from the bed, "Marina spent the whole night working on it. She was scared. She said she needed to protect the evidence." Finally, after several minutes of attempts, Harrison discovered a small hidden compartment in the pendant. Inside, there was a tiny memory card. "We need a computer," he said, holding the card carefully. "Use mine," offered Emily, already taking her laptop out of her bag. While they waited for the computer to start, Richard watched Lily. The girl was exhausted, but refused to sleep. There was a strength in her that impressed him more and more. It wasn't just her extraordinary gift, it was her resilience, her ability to remain kind despite everything she had been through. "You need to rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be an important day." His surgery was scheduled for the first hour of the morning. Lily looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see through him. "You need to rest too. The colors around. You are still unstable." "I found something," announced Harrison, interrupting the moment. "They're files. Dozens of them. Documents, photos, laboratory records." Everyone approached to see the computer screen. The files revealed an elaborate scheme of data falsification in medical research. Clayton wasn't alone. There was an entire network of doctors and researchers involved, manipulating results to get drug approvals. "Oh my God," murmured Emily, scrolling through the documents. This explains why he was so desperate to silence Marina. She discovered everything. But there was more. Among the files was a video dated the night Marina died. The image was grainy, captured by a security camera, but it clearly showed Clayton and two other men chasing Marina in a parking lot. The accident had been meticulously planned. "She knew," said Evelyn, her voice trembling. "She knew they would come after her. That's why she left the evidence with Lily. She knew no one would suspect a child." Lily was very quiet, absorbing everything. Memories she didn't know she had began to emerge. Her mother working late in the laboratory, whispered conversations on the phone, the fear in her eyes in recent days. "But why didn't she hand this over to the police?" asked Richard. Because the police were involved, replied Harrison, pointing to more documents. There were powerful people getting paid to keep everything covered up. Marina didn't know who to trust. At that moment, Lily staggered, exhausted. Richard, ignoring his own pain, instinctively reached out his arms. To everyone's surprise, including his own, the girl snuggled into his lap. "What do we do now?" asked Emily, looking worriedly at Richard. His surgery was scheduled for just a few hours away, but there was so much at stake. "Now," he said, his voice determined as he adjusted Lily in his arms, "we protect this girl, and we make sure that Marina's sacrifice wasn't in vain." Harrison began making copies of the files. "I have contacts in the medical press, people I trust. As soon as the sun rises, this will explode in a way they won't be able to control." Evelyn watched Richard with Lily, a small smile on her lips. "You've changed," she said simply. Richard looked at the sleeping girl in his arms. Yes, he had changed. The man who had humiliated a child on the street seemed to have existed in another life. How had he been so blind for so long? But there was no time for prolonged reflections. A movement in the hallway caught Emily's attention. Through the glass door, she saw men in suits approaching. "We have a problem," she whispered. "They seem to be lawyers." Harrison quickly closed the laptop. Clayton must have made some calls before being detained. They're coming after the evidence. Richard settled back in the armchair, still holding Lily. His face took on the determined expression that had made him one of the most powerful businessmen in the country. "Emily, you know what to do." His assistant nodded, already picking up the phone. Years working with Richard had prepared her for crisis situations. Within minutes, she had activated her own network of contacts, journalists, lawyers, people who owed Richard favors. The men entered the room, their expensive suits and arrogant expressions contrasting with the simplicity of the environment. The leader of the group introduced himself as legal representative of Dr. Clayton Abernathy. "We've come to collect any materials related to the case," he said, extending an official document. "By court order." Richard just smiled, that smile that had closed countless multi-million-dollar deals. "Interesting," he said, his voice calm, "because my lawyers have just obtained an injunction protecting all the evidence. And besides—" At that moment, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Emily. "It's done. The evidence is already everywhere." Richard's smile widened. "Besides, gentlemen, you're a little late. The evidence you came to collect is already circulating in all the major media outlets in the country." The lawyers' faces paled. At that very moment, their own phones began to ring frantically. The story was leaking, and there was no way to contain it anymore. Lily stirred in Richard's lap, opening her eyes sleepily. "Their colors are funny," she murmured, "all mixed up with fear." Richard couldn't contain a laugh, the first genuine laugh in years. It was true. The men looked about to crumble, their arrogant poses completely destroyed. But the battle was far from over. There was still Richard's surgery, Lily's future to secure, a whole network of corruption to dismantle. The night had only been the beginning. On the horizon, the first rays of sun began to tint the sky of Manhattan. A new day was dawning, bringing with it promises of justice and redemption. And at the center of it all, unlikely as it seemed, was the newly formed bond between a businessman who had lost his humanity and a little girl who had helped him find it again. The morning arrived, bringing chaos to the hospital. Journalists crowded at the entrance, vying for the best position to get images and information. The story of the fraud scheme in medical research had exploded in all the media, and the name of Clayton Abernathy was in every headline. In the surgical center, Richard prepared for his operation. The medical team checked the equipment and monitors, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Through the small window in the door, he could see Lily sitting in the hallway, her little legs swinging without reaching the floor. "You don't have to be afraid," she had said moments before, when she noticed his nervousness. "The colors are clearer now. Everything will be all right." Dr. Harrison approached the stretcher, adjusting his surgical mask. "Are you ready?" Richard nodded, but held the doctor's arm. "Promise you'll take care of her while I'm in here. Don't let anyone take her." "You can rest assured. Emily is with her, and we've already provided extra security. No one will get near Lily." The anesthesia began to take effect, and the last image Richard saw before falling asleep was Lily's face through the window, her big, worried eyes fixed on him. In the hallway, Emily tried to distract the girl, but Lily kept her eyes glued to the door of the surgical center. Suddenly, she straightened up in the chair, tense. "What is it?" asked Emily, noticing the change in her behavior. "Something's wrong," murmured Lily, getting off the chair. "The colors, they're changing too fast." Inside the operating room, the monitors began to beep frantically. Richard's blood pressure plummeted, his heart reacting unexpectedly to the anesthesia. "He's going into anaphylactic shock," shouted one of the doctors. Dr. Harrison ran between the equipment, trying to stabilize the patient. "This doesn't make sense. All the allergy tests came back negative." "Let me in," Lily's voice sounded from the hallway. "I know what's happening." "We can't let a child into the surgical center," protested a nurse. But Harrison, who had learned to trust the girl's extraordinary gift, hesitated only for a second before ordering, "Let her in." "Quick!" Lily was quickly fitted with a gown and mask, looking even smaller in the hospital clothes that were too big for her. She approached the stretcher, her eyes studying the colors that only she could see. "It's not the anesthesia," she said, pointing to Richard's arm. "It's the antibiotic. They switched his medication this morning." Harrison quickly checked the chart. It was true. The prophylactic antibiotic had been changed at the last moment. "Who authorized this change?" he asked, while the team was already working to reverse the allergic reaction. It was Dr. Abernathy," replied a nurse, consulting the notes. "He passed the prescription before being detained." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even imprisoned, Clayton had found one last way to try to get revenge. Thanks to Lily's early warning, the team managed to control the situation. Richard's vital signs began to stabilize, and after some tense minutes, the surgery could proceed normally. Outside, Emily received more worrying news. The social worker had arrived, accompanied by a court order. "The girl can't stay in the hospital indefinitely," explained the assistant, showing the documents. "And with her grandmother hospitalized in critical condition, we need to take her to a temporary shelter." "No!" protested Lily, clinging to the chair. "I don't want to go. I need to stay with my grandma." Evelyn, in her bed in the other room, heard the commotion. Her eyes, though clouded by the disease, filled with tears. "My little granddaughter. I can't lose her too." The social worker tried to be gentle but firm. "It's only temporary, dear, until your grandmother gets better." "There must be another solution," argued Emily, her brain working frantically. "Mr. Sterling, he has resources, he can—" "Mr. Sterling is in surgery and has no legal connection with the child," interrupted the assistant. "And with all the scandal involving the case, we need to follow the procedures to the letter." It was then that Dr. Harrison came out of the operating room quickly. "The surgery is going well, but we discovered something important." He showed the results of the blood tests done after the allergic reaction. The antibiotic that was administered, it wasn't just different from the one prescribed originally. It was a lethal dose. The social worker paled. "Are you saying that—" "I'm saying that there was an attempted murder," completed Harrison, "and Lily is our main witness. Taking her now could put her at risk." "Besides," added Emily, taking her tablet, I just received this from Mr. Sterling's legal team. She showed a newly arrived document. It's a request for temporary guardianship, filed last night before the surgery. The social worker examined the papers, frowning. This is quite irregular. What's irregular is trying to separate a child from her only family when she's already gone through so much trauma, replied Emily, her voice firm, especially when she's under protection for being a witness in a criminal case. Lily watched the discussion with wide eyes, her small body trembling. The colors around everyone were so intense that they hurt. Please, she whispered. I just want to stay with my grandma. And with Richard. Something in the way she said his name, no longer Mr. or Sir, but Richard, made everyone stop. The transformation that had happened between the cold businessman and the street girl was palpable. The social worker sighed, putting away her papers. I'm going to consult my superiors, but the situation needs to be regularized as soon as possible. When she left, Lily ran to Evelyn's room, who opened her arms to receive her. For a moment of perfect lucidity, grandmother and granddaughter hugged each other, sharing the same fear of separation. Everything will be all right, my love, murmured Evelyn, stroking her granddaughter's hair. God didn't bring us this far for nothing. Emily and Harrison watched the scene from the door, both aware that the battle was far from over. Somewhere in the city, even imprisoned, Clayton still had allies, and the attempted murder during the surgery proved that they wouldn't give up easily. In the surgical center, oblivious to all this, Richard was being stitched up. The surgery had been a success, but his heart now carried much more than just a medical condition. It carried the weight of a silent promise made to a little girl who, ironically, had saved his life in more ways than one. The recovery room was silent, except for the constant beep of the cardiac monitors. Richard slowly woke up from the anesthesia, his mind still hazy. The first thing he saw was Lily, asleep in an armchair near the bed, curled up like a kitten. Emily had put a blanket over her. She refused to leave, whispered Emily, noticing that he had woken up. Said she needed to watch the colors around you. Richard tried to move and felt a stab of pain in his chest. Dr. Harrison, who had just entered the room, approached to examine him. The surgery was a success, he explained in a low voice. But we almost lost you because of that adulterated antibiotic. If it wasn't for her, he indicated Lily with his head. How is she? Asked Richard, his voice hoarse. Exhausted. But she doesn't want to sleep properly. She's worried that social services will come back to take her. The mention of social services made Richard stir, triggering alarms on the monitors. Harrison placed a hand on his shoulder. Calm down. For now, we've managed to prevent them from taking her. Your lawyers are taking care of the request for temporary guardianship, but Evelyn's situation is getting complicated, completed Emily. Alzheimer's is progressing rapidly. Doctors say she needs specialized care. Richard closed, his eyes for a moment thinking. When he opened them again, there was determination in his gaze. Find the best Alzheimer's specialized clinic in the country, ordered Emily, no matter the cost, and I want it to be near here, where Lily can visit her whenever she wants. I've already started researching some options, replied Emily, showing notes on her tablet. But there's another problem. The press found out about the link between Lily and Marina Santos. They're speculating about the attempted murder during your surgery. The reporters are practically camped at the entrance of the hospital. As if to confirm her words, shouts and flashes could be seen through the window. The story had become even. Beggar, the powerful businessman who had humiliated a street girl, now fighting to protect her from a criminal conspiracy. Lily stirred in the armchair, restless in her sleep. She murmured disconnected words, her little face contorted in an expression of fear. She's been having nightmares, explained Harrison. I think her mother's memories are coming back, mixed with everything that's happening. At that moment, Lily woke up startled, silent tears running down her face. "Hey, little one," called Richard softly. "It's all right. I'm here." She ran to the bed, stopping only when she saw the tubes and monitors. Her eyes studied the colors around him. "It's better," she said, relieved. "Clearer. But there are still some dark spots." "Those are just the pains from the surgery," explained Harrison. "They'll pass with time." "Like the spots from my mom passed," murmured Lily, more to herself. Before she stopped, her eyes widening with a sudden memory. "What is it?" asked Richard, noting her expression. "I remembered," she said, her voice trembling. "My mom, she also saw the colors, but different from mine. She saw the colors of the medicines, of the research. That's how she discovered—" "Discovered what, honey?" encouraged Harrison gently. "That the medicines were wrong, that they were lying about the tests. She tried to fix it, but—" Lily began to sob. "The bad man got angry. He and the others. I saw them yelling at her in the laboratory. Then, Richard reached out, ignoring the pain of the movement, and held her small hand. "You're safe now. I won't let anyone hurt you." "Promise?" she asked, her big eyes fixed on him. "And promise." Outside the room, someone cleared his throat. It was the social worker, accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as a representative of Child Protective Services. "Mr. Sterling," he began, consulting a folder. "We're here to discuss the situation of the minor Lily Santos." Lily shrank back, squeezing Richard's hand harder. "I understand your intention to help," continued the man, "but you need to understand that there are legal procedures to be followed. We can't simply hand over the custody of a child to someone without a full evaluation, especially considering your recent history." He was referring, of course, to the viral video of the humiliation on the street. Richard felt his face burn with shame. "Furthermore," added the social worker, "with Mrs. Evelyn needing to be admitted to a specialized clinic, the girl would be under your exclusive responsibility. A single man, without experience with children, involved in a public scandal." "And what's the alternative?" interrupted Emily, her voice controlled but firm. "Put her in a shelter where she would be exposed and vulnerable, when there are powerful people wanting to silence her. Precisely because of that, we need to ensure that she is in a safe and suitable environment," replied the man from CPS. "And what could be safer than the home of one of the richest men in the country, with all the security structure he can provide?" argued Harrison. Lily, who had followed the discussion in silence, suddenly spoke. "I want to stay with him." Everyone turned to look at her. She continued, her voice small but determined. "His colors have changed. Before they were dark and sad. Now they are clear, different. Like yours, Doctor." She looked at Harrison. "Like my mom's." The representative from CPS seemed uncomfortable. "Unfortunately, we can't base legal decisions on colors that only you see, dear." "No," agreed Richard, his voice stronger now. "But you can base them on facts. Fact, I have the resources to protect her and ensure she has everything she needs. Fact, she saved my life twice. And fact, she is the only witness in a serious criminal case. Separating us now would not only be cruel, but also dangerous." A heavy silence fell over the room. From the hallway came the distant sounds of the hospital. Hurried footsteps, muffled voices, the constant noise of a city that didn't stop. "We're going to do a preliminary assessment," decided finally the representative from CPS. "A social worker will make regular visits, and at the slightest sign that something isn't suitable—" "It won't be necessary," assured Richard, "because I intend to do this the right way. Not only temporary guardianship, but permanent adoption. If she wants," he added, looking at Lily. The girl's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were different, not of fear or sadness, but of hope. What no one noticed, focused on the scene unfolding in the room, was the figure that watched, everything from afar, through the window in the hallway. a man of ordinary appearance who could easily be mistaken for any other visitor to the hospital. In his pocket, a cell phone vibrated. The message was short, coming from a blocked number. "Keep them under surveillance soon." A week had passed since Richard's surgery. The hospital room had transformed into a kind of improvised headquarters. Emily coordinated a team of lawyers who worked on the custody proceedings and the transfer of Evelyn to the specialized clinic. Dr. Harrison continued to study Lily's extraordinary case, documenting her unique abilities. That morning, Richard watched the girl who slept on the sofa in the room, a storybook still open on her lap. In recent nights, she had refused to leave, claiming she needed to protect him. Even after all the arguments and attempts to convince her to sleep in a proper bed, she remained firm in her decision. "The colors are not completely safe yet," she said, every time they tried to take her to rest elsewhere. Evelyn, in her own room, alternated between moments of lucidity and confusion. In the good moments, she and Richard talked at length about Lily, about Marina, about the past that was slowly beginning to make sense. "Marina had the same gift," explained Evelyn during one of these conversations, "but different. She saw the anomalies in the research, in the medicines. That's how she began to distrust Clayton's work." "Why didn't she report it before?" asked Richard. "Fear," replied Evelyn, her eyes momentarily clear. "Clayton had powerful connections. She needed to gather concrete evidence first, but mostly her voice failed. She was afraid for Lily. She knew they would come after the girl if they found out she had inherited the gift." The conversation was interrupted by Emily, who entered the room hurriedly carrying her tablet. "We need to talk," she said, her face tense. "I just received some worrying information." Richard looked at Lily, making sure she was still sleeping. Before signaling for Emily to continue, "Clayton gained access to a phone in prison," she explained, showing call logs. "And we discovered that he has a brother, Marcus Abernathy, ex-military, specialist in private security. And he has been seen at the hospital in recent days, disguised, watching. Our investigators found records of significant bank transfers to his account, coming from an offshore company linked to Clayton." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "He's planning something." "There's more," continued Emily. "The clinic where we intend to transfer Evelyn. We discovered that one of the doctors on the board has old ties with Clayton. If we take Evelyn there, we'll be handing her directly into their hands," completed Richard, his mind working quickly. "And without Evelyn, they would have a strong argument to take Lily from your custody," concluded Emily. "The custody process would be much more complicated without the grandmother's support." At that moment, Lily stirred on the sofa, murmuring in her sleep. She seemed to be having another nightmare. Richard made to get up to comfort her, but Dr. Harrison, who had just entered the room, stopped him. "You still need rest," he reminded him. "The surgery was successful, but your recovery isn't complete." Harrison approached Lily, gently adjusting the blanket over her. The girl calmed down with the gesture, falling back into a deep sleep. "How's the process of transferring Evelyn?" asked the doctor. "Complicated," replied Emily. "We need to find another clinic, one that has no connection with Clayton. But time is against us. Her condition is worsening. She needs specialized care urgently." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. A few weeks ago, his biggest concern was closing multi-million-dollar deals. Now he held the fate of an entire family in his hands. "And the investigations into Marina's death?" he asked, opening his eyes again. "The police reopened the case," said Emily. "The evidence we found on the flash drive is conclusive. Clayton didn't act alone. There was a whole network of people involved in the falsification of the research. Some have already started talking, trying to make deals. But that also means there are more people interested in silencing Lily," observed Harrison. She's the only one who can visually confirm the adulteration of the drugs, just like her mother did. A movement at the door caught everyone's attention. It was one of the security guards hired by Richard, with a worried expression on his face. "Sir," he said in a low voice, "we just identified 2 more suspicious men in the perimeter of the hospital. They have the same profile as Clayton's brother." Richard exchanged glances with Emily and Harrison. The situation was escalating faster than they had predicted. "We need to get them out of here," he decided. "Both Lily and Evelyn. It's not safe anymore." "But where to?" asked Emily. "Any clinic could have connections with Clayton, and a hotel would be too exposed." "My place," replied Richard without hesitation. "The penthouse has reinforced security, controlled access. I can hire private nurses for Evelyn, turn one of the rooms into a mini ICU if necessary." "It's risky to move her in her condition," warned Harrison. "It's riskier to leave her here," retorted Richard. "Emily, arrange everything. Medical team, equipment, whatever is necessary. Money is no object." At that moment, Lily woke up startled. Her eyes widened with fear. "The colors," she whispered, looking at the door. "There are bad people coming, many dark colors." Everyone turned to the door. In the hallway, shadows moved, approaching the room. The security guard immediately put his hand on his holster, but Richard signaled for him to wait. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but firm, "activate the contingency plan, now." His assistant was already on the phone, quickly typing a message. Within minutes, the hospital would be flooded by a private security team, strategically positioned to protect both Richard's room and Evelyn's. The night would be long, and the danger was just beginning. But this time, they were prepared. Richard looked at Lily, who had approached his bed, her small fingers intertwined in his. "Everything will be all right," he promised, both to her and to himself. "I won't let anything happen to you or your grandmother." What he didn't say, but everyone in the room knew, was that that promise could cost much more than money. It could cost lives. The early morning dragged on in the hospital, while Richard's security team stood guard in the corridors. The suspicious men had disappeared as mysteriously as they had appeared, but the tension remained in the air. No one dared to lower their guard. Evelyn had been transferred to Richard's room for security reasons. Now she slept in an improvised bed, with Lily nestled beside her. The girl had finally succumbed to exhaustion, but her sleep was restless, disturbed by nightmares that she couldn't explain when she woke up. "We need to act fast," whispered Emily, showing her tablet to Richard and Dr. Harrison. "The transfer to your penthouse is almost ready. I managed to assemble a trusted medical team, people without any connection to Clayton or the hospital." "How's the custody process?" asked Richard, his voice hoarse with fatigue. "Complicated," she replied. "The judge is reluctant due to the whole situation. The viral video, the research scandal, the threats. He fears that Lily is being put at more risk by staying with you." Richard closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of irony. His money and influence, which had always opened every door, now seemed to work against him. A soft groan caught everyone's attention. It was Evelyn, having another of her lucid moments. "Marina knew," she murmured, her eyes focused on something distant. "She knew that one day we would need help. That's why she left that." "Left what?" "Mrs. Evelyn," asked Harrison, gently approaching. "The other flash drive," she replied. "There wasn't just one. Marina, she was clever, very clever." Richard and Emily exchanged glances. "Where is this other flash drive?" he asked. Evelyn frowned, struggling against the fog that constantly tried to take her mind. In the place where it all began, where Marina... Her voice failed, lucidity slipping away again. "Mrs. Evelyn," insisted Emily softly. "Where did Marina work? Where did it all begin?" But it was too late. Evelyn had returned to her confused world of scrambled memories, murmuring disconnected words about flowers and birds. At that moment, Lily woke up startled. "The laboratory!" "She," exclaimed, her eyes wide. "I remembered. Mum used to take me there sometimes, when she had no one to leave me with. It was a big building with blue walls." "The old research center," murmured Harrison. "It was deactivated 2 years ago, after Clayton took over the new laboratory. In the city center. She hid things there," continued Lily, the memories returning in flashes, "in secret places. She said it was our special treasure, that one day I would understand." Richard tried to get out of bed, but a stab of pain made him recoil. "Emily." "I'm already arranging it," replied his assistant, already on the phone. "I'm going to send a trusted team to check the location." "No," interrupted Lily. "It has to be me. Only I know where to look." "Mum only showed me." "No way," protested Richard. "It's too dangerous." "But the colors," she insisted. "I need to see the colors of the place. That's how I'm going to find it." A heavy silence fell over the room. Everyone knew that Lily was right. Her unique gift was the key to finding what Marina had hidden. But taking her there would be extremely risky. "I'll go with her," offered Harrison. "I know the building. I worked there for a time, with the proper security team." "No," interrupted Richard again. "I'm going." "You just had surgery," reminded Harrison. "You're not in condition." "It doesn't matter. I promised I'd protect her, and that's what I'm going to do." Emily, who had finished her call, cleared her throat to get attention. "Maybe there's a way. The building is abandoned, but it still belongs to Clayton's old company. With the proceedings underway, I got a court order allowing access to the site for evidence collection." "How long do we have?" asked Richard. "The order is valid for 24 hours, starting at dawn." Richard looked out the window. The first rays of sun were beginning to tint the sky of Manhattan. "All right," he decided. "Let's do this now. Harrison, I need you to stay with Evelyn. Emily, organize the security. I want trusted men around the entire perimeter of the building." "And me?" asked Lily, her voice small but determined. Richard looked at her for a long time. This girl who had changed his life in so many ways, who carried a weight much greater than any child should carry. "You, little one, will show me the way," he replied softly. The next hour was of intense preparation. While Emily coordinated logistics and security, a nurse helped Richard get dressed. The effort left him pale and sweaty, but he refused to take stronger painkillers. He needed to keep his mind clear. Lily also prepared in her own way. Sitting next to her grandmother, she held the necklace her mother had given her, as if seeking strength in it. "Grandma," she called softly, "I'm going to find Mom's treasure." Evelyn, in another moment of lucidity, held her granddaughter's hand. "She would be proud of you, my love. So proud." When the sun finally rose completely, a small caravan left the hospital discreetly. In the first van, Richard and Lily, accompanied by 2 security guards. In the others, the rest of the security and support team. What they didn't realize was the dark car that followed them at a distance, where Marcus Abernathy spoke on the phone. "They're moving, going exactly where we wanted." The trap was set. The final game was about to begin. The old research center stood like a ghost in the early morning, its dusty windows reflecting the first rays of sun. The 3-story building, with its peeling walls of faded blue, seemed even more melancholic, abandoned. Richard watched as his security team checked the perimeter. Beside him, Lily held his hand tightly, her big eyes scanning the building with a mixture of fear and recognition. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked for the last time. "We can go back." Lily shook her head. "The colors, they're calling me, like they did when Mom brought me here." Emily coordinated the operation by radio, ensuring that each entrance and exit was covered. "The court order gives us full access to the building," she informed him. "But we need to be fast. We don't know how long we have until—" She didn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood. They weren't the only ones interested in what might be hidden there. Carefully, the group entered the building. The entrance hall was covered in dust, with abandoned furniture creating strange shadows. Lily stopped for a moment, closing her eyes as if she were orienting herself. "This way," she said finally, pulling Richard towards a side corridor. Each step was a challenge for him. The surgery was still recent, and his body protested against the effort. But the determination in his eyes left no doubt. He would go to the end. "Mum's laboratory was on the second floor," explained Lily as they slowly climbed the stairs. "She always said it was our special place." On the second floor, the corridor stretched in two directions. Lily hesitated for a moment, studying the colors that only she could see. "There," she pointed to a door at the end of the hallway on the right. "That's where she worked." The laboratory was in better condition than the rest of the building, as if someone had made an effort to preserve it. Equipment covered by cloths, files still on the shelves, a thinner layer of dust on the surfaces. "Someone has been here," observed one of the security guards, noting recent marks on the floor. Richard felt a chill in his spine. Were they being expected? Lily, however, seemed oblivious to the danger. She moved around the laboratory with familiarity, touching objects, reminiscing. She stopped in front of a specific counter. "This is where she sat me," she said softly. "Gave me paper and pencils to draw while she worked, and there," she pointed to a tall cabinet in the corner, "was where she kept the treasures." Richard signaled for two security guards to check the cabinet. It was locked. "It's not there," corrected Lily. "It's behind." With the help of the security guards, the heavy cabinet was moved away from the wall, revealing a small cavity in the baseboard. It was almost imperceptible, the kind of hiding place that only a child would notice. Lily knelt down, her small hands groping the opening. "I found it!" she exclaimed, pulling out a small package wrapped in plastic. That's when they heard the footsteps in the hallway. "Everyone quiet," ordered the head of security by radio. "We have company." Richard pulled Lily behind a counter, ignoring the pain that the sudden movement caused. The security guards took strategic positions, guns in hand. The footsteps approached. There were several pairs of feet, moving with military precision. "We know you're in there," a familiar voice echoed through the hallway. It was Marcus Abernathy. "We don't need to do this the hard way. We just want what the girl found." Richard felt Lily tremble beside him. She held the package against her chest, as if her life depended on it. "His colors are very dark," she whispered, "like the bad man from the hospital." By radio, Emily reported that more men had been seen entering the building. They were surrounded. "Mr. Sterling," continued Marcus, his voice closer now, "I know you're there. Think about it. You've barely recovered from surgery. You have a child to protect. Is it worth risking everything for some old documents?" Richard looked at Lily, then at the package in her hands. They weren't just old documents. It was the truth that Marina had died to protect. The truth that could finally bring justice. "I'm not going to let you go through this again," he murmured to Lily. "I'm not going to let you lose anyone else." The girl looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see through the soul. "I'm not going to lose," she replied with surprising conviction. "You promised." At that moment the radio crackled. It was Emily again, her voice urgent but controlled. "Reinforcements on the way. Hold your ground." Marcus must have heard something. Two, because his voice became more tense. "Last chance. Hand over the package and no one gets hurt." Richard exchanged glances with his security team. Years of experience in difficult negotiations had taught him to read situations, to calculate risks. Marcus was nervous. Something wasn't going as planned. That's when Lily tugged at his sleeve. "There's another way," she whispered. "Mom showed." Me once, for emergencies. Richard's heart raced. Where? She pointed to a corner of the laboratory, where a large supply cabinet leaned against the wall. There's a passage to the other laboratory, and from there to the fire escape. It was risky. Richard was still weak, and the passage would probably be tight. But they didn't have much choice. Johnson, he called softly to the head of security. Keep them busy. We're going to need cover. The man nodded, understanding the plan without further explanation. With silent gestures, he organized his team for a coordinated distraction. When I say now, you run to the cabinet, instructed Richard to Lily. Don't look back. Don't stop, no matter what you hear. The girl squeezed his hand, showing that she understood. In the hallway, the footsteps of Marcus and his men grew closer. Johnson made a hand signal. 3, 2, 1, now! Shouted Richard. Chaos exploded in the laboratory. The security guards overturned tables and cabinets, creating a curtain of broken glass and falling equipment. Shouts and orders filled the air. Richard ran as best he could, guided by Lily. Each step was agony, but the adrenaline kept him moving. Behind them, they heard sounds of fighting and pursuit. The supply cabinet really hid a narrow passage, probably an architectural error that Marina had discovered and transformed into an escape route. "Quick!" whispered Lily, her voice trembling but determined. "It's almost dawn." The light of the rising sun really began to enter through the dirty windows, creating long, distorted shadows. Somewhere in the building, sirens began to sound. Richard felt his heart protest against the effort, but he couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. The package that Lily carried could change everything. It could finally bring justice for Marina, safety for Lily, peace for Evelyn, if they could get out of there alive. The secret passage was narrow and dark, forcing Richard and Lily to move slowly. The air was heavy with dust and mold, and every breath was a challenge. Richard could feel the stitches from the surgery protesting against the effort, but refused to stop. "Are you all right?" whispered Lily, noticing his heavy breathing. "I'm fine," he lied, trying to disguise the pain. "Keep moving." Nadutadi. By radio, which crackled with interference in the tight passage, they could hear fragments of the battle unfolding in the laboratory. Richard's security team was keeping Marcus and his men busy, but they wouldn't last long. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the other side. The adjacent laboratory was in worse condition than the first, with broken equipment scattered across the floor and partially broken windows. "The fire escape is right there," pointed Lily, but her voice suddenly failed. Richard followed her gaze and understood the reason. There were dark stains on the floor, old but still visible, stains that looked like blood. "It was here," murmured Lily, her eyes fixed on the spot. "It was here that they hurt her. I remember now." Her small hands squeezed the package tighter, and Richard could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Hey," he called softly, kneeling with difficulty to be at her height. "Look at me. I'm not going to let that happen again. I promised, remember?" Lily nodded, wiping away the tears with the sleeve of her shirt. That's when they heard voices coming from the hallway. "They must have used the passage," shouted someone. "Go around the other way." Richard got up quickly, ignoring the stab of pain that the movement caused. "Come on, we need to get to the ladder." But before they could move, the door to the laboratory opened violently. Marcus Abernathy was there, his face red with anger and effort. "The race is over," he said, advancing towards them. "Give me the package, girl. I don't want to hurt you like we hurt your mother." Something changed on Lily's face upon hearing those words. The fear gave way to an expression that Richard had never seen in her before, a mixture of anger and determination that made her look much older than her 5 years. "You," she said, her voice trembling not with fear but with fury. "You were here that night. You held her while the bad man—" Marcus stopped for a moment, surprised. "Impossible. You were too small. You couldn't remember. "But I remember," continued Lily. "I remember your smell, your colors. They're even darker now." Richard placed himself in front of her protectively, even knowing that in his weakened state, he would be no match for a trained ex-soldier. "It's over, Marcus," he said, trying to buy time. "The police are on their way. The evidence that Marina left is already being released. You and Clayton lost." Marcus laughed, a cold and humorless sound. "You really think my brother doesn't have a contingency plan? Why do you think he sent me here personally?" He took something out of his pocket. It looked like a small remote control. "This building has been abandoned for years. A short circuit, an accidental fire, no one would question it." Richard's blood ran cold as he understood the implication. He looked quickly around. Besides the partially broken windows, there was no other way out. The fire escape was only a few meters away, but they would have to get past Marcus to reach it. That's when his radio crackled again. It was Emily. "Richard, the reinforcements have arrived. We're entering the building now." Marcus must have heard something too, because his finger moved towards the button on the control. "No!" shouted Lily suddenly. "Look!" She pointed to something behind Marcus. By reflex, he turned around, and it was that moment of distraction that changed everything. Richard grabbed Lily and ran towards the window closest to the fire escape. Marcus, realizing the trick, shouted in anger and pressed the button. The sound of explosions began to echo through the building, but they weren't the main explosions he had planned. They were small detonations, preparatory, intended to start a controlled fire. "The ladder!" shouted Richard, pushing Lily towards the metal structure. "Go down, quick!" The girl began to descend, still clinging to the package. Richard followed her, each movement an agony in his recently operated body. Marcus ran to the window, ready to follow them, but stopped upon hearing voices and footsteps approaching rapidly. He looked at the control in his hand, then at the flames that were beginning to spread through the laboratory. "Police! Freeze!" a voice thundered from the hallway. With a last look of hatred at his targets on the run, Marcus pressed the main button and ran in the opposite direction. The explosion that followed was deafening. Richard felt the fire escape shake with the impact, pieces of glass and debris raining around him. Below him, Lily screamed. "Don't stop," he ordered, trying to protect her from the wreckage with his own body. "Keep going down." The fire spread rapidly through the upper floor, and the smoke began to make visibility difficult. Richard could hear sirens in the distance. Firefighters, police, ambulances, but they would be too far away to help if they couldn't reach the ground. That's when he heard something that made his heart stop. The sound of metal creaking. The structure of the fire escape, old and poorly maintained, began to give way with the heat and weight. "Lily," he called, his voice hoarse. "How much further?" Just a little more," she replied, coughing with the smoke. "I can see the ground." The creaking increased. Richard looked up and saw the flames consuming the top of the ladder. In a matter of minutes, the entire structure could collapse. But they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. Not when they finally had the evidence that Marina had died to protect. Salvation, or tragedy, was just a few feet below. The heat from the fire was intense, even on the external ladder. Richard and Lily continued down, each step a challenge against time. The metal structure groaned and swayed dangerously, threatening to give way at any moment. "Hold on tight," shouted Emily from the ground. She had managed to get to the site with part of the security team. "The firefighters are coming." Another explosion shook the building, causing the ladder to tremble violently. Lily slipped, letting out a scream of fright, but managed to hold on. The package with the evidence almost fell from her hands. "Let it fall," shouted Richard, seeing her dilemma. "Your life is more important than any document." But Lily held the package tighter. "I can't. It's the last thing I have from Mom." The metal continued to creak, protesting against the heat and weight. They were on the second floor now, but the last flight of stairs seemed especially unstable. That's when they heard a sharp, metallic sound, bolts coming loose from the wall. "Jump!" shouted Emily. "We'll catch you!" Richard looked down. The security team had improvised a human net ready to catch Lily. It was risky, but less than staying on the ladder that was about to collapse. "Lily," he called, trying to keep his voice calm despite the terror he felt. "Do you trust me?" The girl looked up, meeting his eyes. For a moment, all the chaos around seemed to disappear. "I trust you," she replied simply. "Then jump. They're going to catch you, and I'll come right after, I promise." Lily hesitated only for a second before doing what he asked. Her small body flew through the air, still clinging to the package, and was safely caught by the security guards below. Richard sighed with relief, but his joy was short-lived. Another rumble shook the structure, and he felt the ladder begin to detach from the wall. "Jump!" shouted Emily. "Now!" But his body, weakened by the recent surgery and the effort of the escape, didn't respond quickly enough. The ladder gave way with a final creak, taking him with it. "No!" Lily's scream cut through the air. By reflex, Richard managed to grab a part of the structure that was still attached to the wall. He hung there, his arms trembling with the effort, pieces of the ladder collapsing around him. The pain was unbearable. He could feel the stitches from the surgery tearing, blood beginning to stain his shirt. But he couldn't give up, not now, not in front of her. "Hold on!" a new voice sounded. The firefighters had finally arrived. While one team fought the fire that consumed the upper floors, another quickly prepared a ladder to reach Richard. "The colors!" shouted Lily suddenly. "They're getting weak. He's hurt!" Richard could feel his strength failing. His vision was beginning to darken at the edges. The heat, the smoke, the pain, everything conspired to make him let go. That's when he heard Lily's voice again, closer now. "Don't give up. You promised. You wouldn't leave me." Those words, so simple but so powerful, gave him the strength he needed to hold on for a few more seconds. Enough time for the firefighters to reach him. The rescue was a blur in his memory. He vaguely remembered hands pulling him, being carried away from the burning building, Lily's worried face floating in his vision. "The package," he murmured, struggling to maintain consciousness. "It's here," replied Emily, showing the package that Lily had protected so bravely. "It's safe." Sirens continued to sound in the background. The building was now completely engulfed in flames, a curtain of black smoke rising to the sky of Manhattan. Somewhere inside, Marcus had disappeared, but his radio, found near the emergency exit, proved his participation in the plan. Paramedics worked quickly, checking Richard's injuries. The stitches had really torn, and he would need another surgery. But he was alive. "We have to take him now," informed one of the paramedics. "No!" protested Lily, grabbing Richard's hand. "I don't want to be alone again." "You're not going to be," assured Emily, kneeling beside her. "We're all going to the hospital. And I have good news. Your grandmother is being transferred to the new clinic today. The best in the country, far away from anyone who can hurt her." Richard, even through the pain and confusion, managed to squeeze Lily's hand. "It's going to be all right," he whispered. The girl looked at him with those eyes that seemed to see through the soul. "I know," she replied. "The colors are different now, clearer, like when Mom hugged me." While the ambulance cut through the city traffic, Emily carefully opened the package they had recovered. Inside, besides more incriminating documents, there was something special. A diary, not a common diary, but a book full of notes about the special gift that Marina shared with her daughter. Pages and more pages explaining how it worked, how it could be used to help people, how Lily should develop this unique ability when she grew up. It was the true treasure that Marina had left, not just evidence against her killers, but a guide for her daughter, a legacy of love and hope. At the hospital, while they prepared Richard for emergency surgery, He made Emily promise that she wouldn't leave Lily alone for a moment. The fear in his eyes was not for himself, but for the little one who had changed his life in so many ways. "Take care of her?" he asked before being taken to the operating room. "You can leave it to me," replied Emily, holding Lily by the hand. "We're not going anywhere." The sun began to set in Manhattan, painting the sky of shades of orange. Somewhere in the city, Dr. Abernathy received the news in his cell that his plan had failed. His empire of lies was crumbling, and this time there was no stopping the truth from coming out. But for Lily, sitting in the waiting room with her mother's diary in her lap, none of that mattered at that moment. For the first time since losing Marina, she didn't feel alone anymore. The colors around her, which had always been her guide, had never been so bright. The night would be long, but the dawn promised a new beginning. 6 months had passed since the events at the abandoned laboratory. Richard's penthouse, once a cold and impersonal space, now overflowed with life. Colorful drawings decorated the walls, toys occupied the corners that had only known document folders, and laughter echoed through the hallways that had once been too silent. That Sunday morning, Richard watched Lily through the living room window. The girl was in the penthouse garden, focused on her newest pastime, cultivating a small flower bed. It had been her idea after a visit to Evelyn at the clinic. "Grandma likes flowers," she had explained simply, "and their colors are always pretty." Evelyn was adjusting well to the new clinic. It was a welcoming place with extensive gardens and a dedicated medical team. Alzheimer's continued to progress, but in a suitable environment and with the correct treatment, she had more moments of lucidity. On weekly visits, she always recognized Lily, and sometimes even managed to tell stories about Marina. "Coffee's ready," Emily announced, entering the room with a tray. She was no longer just an assistant. She had become an essential part of that makeshift family that had formed. "Lily!" Richard called. "Coffee time!" The girl ran in, her hands dirty with soil, a smile lighting up her face. She seemed bigger now, not just in size, but in presence. The shadow of fear that had once clouded her eyes had given way to a quiet confidence. "Did you wash your hands?" Emily asked, already knowing the answer. Lily ran to the bathroom, laughing. Her laughter, once so rare, was now constant music in the house. While they had coffee, Richard mentally reviewed the day's schedule. The final hearing of the case would be on Tuesday. Dr. Abernathy and his accomplices would finally face justice, thanks to the evidence left by Marina and the courageous testimonies of several people who had been silenced before. Marcus was never found after the fire in the laboratory, but his escape made him even more guilty in the eyes of the law. The investigations had revealed a much larger network of corruption than they had imagined, involving not only fraudulent research, but also embezzlement of medications and illegal testing. "Thinking about the hearing?" Emily asked, noticing his distant expression. "Among other things," he replied, "the judge should finalize the adoption process this week as well." Lily, returning from the bathroom with clean hands, stopped when she heard that. Even after months of living with Richard, even with all the legal process underway, sometimes she still had difficulty believing that it was real, that she finally had a home. "It'll be okay," she said, sitting next to him. "The colors are saying so." Richard smiled. Lily's special gift had developed even further in recent months. With the help of Marina's diary, she was learning to understand her abilities better, to use them in a more focused way. Dr. Harrison, who continued to follow her case with professional fascination, had created a special study program for her. 3 times a week, Lily went to the hospital for lessons, sessions where she helped identify conditions difficult to diagnose, always under careful supervision. "You know what else the colors are saying?" she asked, with a mischievous smile. "What?" that you need to rest more. There are still dark spots here. She touched his chest lightly, where the surgery scar was still sensitive. She's right, Emily agreed. You've been working too hard in recent weeks. Richard couldn't deny it. Even after everything that had happened, even having completely redefined his priorities in life, it was still difficult to change some habits. But he was learning day after day. His company continued to prosper, but now it operated differently. A significant portion of the profits was directed to social projects, especially those focused on homeless children. The man who had once humiliated a girl asking for help now dedicated his influence to ensuring that other children did not have to go through the same thing. "I have a surprise for you," he said to Lily. "Want to see?" Her eyes sparkled with expectation. Richard went to his office and returned with an envelope. "What is it?" she asked, curious. "Open it." Inside the envelope was an old photograph, restored. It showed Marina in her laboratory, smiling at the camera while holding a baby Lily in her arms. It had taken weeks to find that photo in the archives of the old research center, and even more time to restore it properly. Lily held the photo carefully, as if it were the most precious object in the world. Her fingers traced gently the smiling face of her mother. "She's happy here," she said softly. "The colors in the photo are like the ones I see now, here at home." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. He knew what she meant. Their home radiated the same colors of love and safety that Marina had once provided to her daughter. "There's one more thing," he said, taking another paper from the envelope. It was a certificate, the official document that would soon make Lily legally his daughter. "This doesn't change anything about your mother," he explained gently. "Marina will always be your mother, and your love for her is part of who you are. This is just a piece of paper that tells the world what we already know in our hearts, that we are a family." Lily looked longingly at the document, then at the photo, and finally at Richard. Her eyes, so wise for someone so young, were full of tears. "I know," she replied simply, before hugging him tightly. Emily discreetly wiped her own eyes, watching the scene. It was amazing how life could change in such a short time, how fate could transform tragedy into redemption, a chance encounter into a deep and true connection. Outside, New York City continued its frenetic pace, but inside that penthouse, time seemed gentler. In the garden, the flowers that Lily had planted were beginning to bloom, small spots of color against the gray of the city, just as she herself had been a point of light in Richard's previously dark life. The morning sun streamed through the windows, creating a spectacle of colors that only Lily could see completely. But everyone there could feel the warmth, the peace, the certainty that after so much suffering, after so much struggle, they had finally found their place in the world. Marina, wherever she was, could rest in peace. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. Her daughter was safe, loved, ready to use her extraordinary gift to make the world a better place, exactly as she had always dreamed. And Richard, the man who had once built his life on foundations of coldness and isolation, finally understood the true measure of success. It wasn't the numbers in his bank account, the buildings he constructed, or the deals he closed. It was the smile of a little girl who called him Dad. It was the peace of knowing that he had made a difference in someone's life. It was the certainty that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of redemption. It was love, simple as that, and at the same time as extraordinarily complex as the colors that his daughter saw in the world. "Let's plant more flowers?" Lily asked, pulling his hand after carefully storing the photo and the document. "Of course," he replied, letting himself be led towards the garden. "All the colors you want." And so, under the sky of New York City, a new story began. A story of colors that few could see, but that everyone could feel. A story of love, of family, of second chances. A story that proved that sometimes the greatest miracles begin in the most unlikely moments, and that there is no force more powerful than the heart of a child, capable of seeing beyond appearances, capable of forgiving, capable of loving. It was the beginning of a new chapter, and this time all the colors were bright.